Alright y'all, before we get into this video, isn't it just great news about Lori Vallow? She was found guilty yesterday on all counts. So there's been justice for Tylee, JJ and Tammy. We've still got the Arizona case for Charles Vallow, and of course we've still got the outcome of proceedings against Chad Daybell. That's to come. Watch this space. Will he plea out now that Lori has been convicted? But great week for justice. We've had Lori Vallow taken down, and on Monday we had Letitia Stauch taken down. And next week we'll have the outcome of the West trial. So watch this space. But in this video, we're going to talk about young Candus. I promised to do this the other day because Candus talked about her past, her childhood, her first set of kids on Miss Daisy's channel, Crime Crazy Critters on the Farm, I think it's called. And I said I was going to respond to it, so here I am, responding to it. Now, we've heard some things about young Candus before by a friend of the family, but we've never heard a detailed account of Candus's past from Candus's own mouth. So this is a good opportunity to learn a little bit more about Candus. Now, I'm going to try and do this from a neutral standpoint. It doesn't mean to say that I'm supporting Candus, but also it doesn't mean to say that I'm trying to roast her. I'm going to try to do this neutrally. I'm going to bring in some psychology. For those that don't know, I am a psychologist. I worked in psychology for over 20 years. I don't work in psychology now, but I did for over 20 years. So we're going to bring in some psychological studies just briefly. So let's do this. So we know from Candus's birth record that she was born on the 3rd of May 1982. This is all public record. She was born in Texas to Kenneth James Bly and Candace Cora Hara. Candace Cora Hara, we know her as Grandis. I hate that, so I generally just call her Grandma. But she was only 19, and Kenneth James Bly was much older. He was in his 40s, and he'd been married previously, and he had a couple of kids from his first marriage. So there's a big age gap between the parents. Does that matter? I don't know, but it's just interesting. So what did Candus say about her early life to Miss Daisy?
This is for all, or Justin, or whatever you call him. He was right about one thing. I pretty much raised myself.
Aww.
When I was real little and a baby and I had heart problems and stuff,
Yeah.
my parents and all that were there. But when you got into my teenage years, they weren't ever there, so.
We do know from a family friend that she had heart problems when she was little. I think she was born with a congenital heart problem. I don't know the nature of that. She is on heart medication now. Apparently, she still has problems with her heart. So she says that when she got into her teenage years, she had absent parents. Now, we do know that Candus's mother, did leave the family home when Candus and her sisters were little. They were brought up by Kenneth, who was known as Jim. He died a couple of years ago. He was a very old man. And according to a family friend, he was a very nice man. So it's interesting what Candus says, that he was an absentee parent. Now, maybe it was because he had to work. That's why he wasn't in the home a lot. Candus was the oldest of Candy and Jim's children. As I said, Jim had a couple of kids from a first marriage, but they, as far as I know, didn't live with Candus. I don't know how well she knows them. I don't know how much contact she had with them when she was a kid. But she was the oldest of 3 girls. You might know that Rosemarie Bly, who is Candus's sister, she went missing at the age of 21. But she was the youngest. And then there was a middle sister as well who wants to stay out of all the ruckus to do with Candus. And she's never spoken out, so I won't talk about her.
I always promised that I would try my best to take care of my children better than what my parents did for me.
Yeah.
And I'm not being mean on my mom or nothing like that. I love her to death. She's a sweetheart. But there's certain things I won't say because it's just not right.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do that to her.
I had a little bit of hard time with my mom too when growing up and everything. Jinkies, on the other hand, she got babied all the way around. Everybody babied her.
You're lying.
Oh my God.
You're lying.
Well, if I think about it long enough, I was kind of casted out. I mean, my dad loved my 2 little sisters, but really didn't care about me.
We don't know whether that's true. And we don't know whether Candice, as the eldest, was given more responsibility when Candy left the home. Sometimes it is the case that when there is one parent that's absent and the other parent is trying their best to hold the household together, that the eldest child does get a lot of responsibility put on them. It's possible that Candice did feel that she wasn't as well looked after or wasn't loved as her 2 younger sisters. It's also sometimes the case, as Miss Daisy intimated there, that the youngest in the family gets babied, gets kind of preferential treatment. We don't know whether that was the case for Candice, but this is all about perception, I guess. We can't verify whether that's true, but if that's Candice's perception of her childhood, then it's an interesting perception just to observe. In terms of abuse, I don't think Candice was abused as a child. Maybe she felt neglected, but I don't think her father abused her. By all accounts, he was a decent guy. Again, that's just what we've been told. He's dead, he can't defend himself, so there's that.
I don't know why. I don't know.
I think you look the most like him. I mean,
That's pretty scary because I don't feel like we had any kind of connection. Like, I've always felt like he wasn't even my real father.
He was her real father. We've got her birth record. Candice told somebody that she spoke to, I can't remember who, but way back when, that Jim wasn't her real father. And her mother had told her that her real father was someone else completely. But I think you can see Candice in Jim. I don't think we need a DNA test to show that Jim was Candice's dad. They look very, very much alike, in my opinion. So she might have felt like the outcast. She might have felt, from Candice's point of view, didn't love her like he loved her sisters. She might have dreamed that she had this other father who was, a hero or something, and that Jim wasn't her real dad, but he was. She wasn't brought up by a stepdad. I've been saying this to people who've been saying Candice was brought up by a stepdad. Been saying it for months, years at this point, and it is not true. Another thing that we can think about, because this is Candice's perception, perhaps it was Candice's personality that was problematic. Perhaps Candice was born with a personality that is different from that of her sisters. Again, this is just speculation, but it could be that she didn't get on as well with her dad because she just had that kind of personality that her dad couldn't understand, and they just clashed. When there's several children in a family and they report what happened in their childhood, they can report very different things because their parents did treat them differently because of the personality of each child. Maybe if Candice's sisters were both daddy's girls and he got on with them better, Candice did actually feel like the outcast. And we know she went on to have a problematic relationship with her first set of children's father, but we'll get into that.
God bless the guy. I mean, he's passed away, so I'm glad he's not in pain or suffering anymore.
Yeah. But there's always that void, right?
Well, yeah, there is, but I'm not going to talk bad about him. I mean, he took care of my sisters really well, so I guess that's all that really matters to me.
And again, it could be that he took care of them better because they got on better, just because her personality was different and her dad couldn't understand her.
I was a grandpa's baby.
Yeah. I was a grandpa's baby, but fortunately I lost him, when I was 6. Then I was his baby.
Hey, I lost mine when I was 6 and 7 years old, too.
But you don't forget him. And I remember everything about my grandpa. And one thing I do remember is he was a strong, independent businessman, and I feel like I take after him a lot.
My grandfather was a Vietnam vet, and he was a very strong man.
That's awesome.
You were close to him, weren't you?
Yeah, me and him were like best friends. Like, I wasn't really close with my grandma, but I was really close with my grandpa. He's like my best friend, my everything. That's like a couple uncles of mine that have passed away. I was really close to them too.
Yeah. Your mom's brothers?
Yeah.
That's interesting that she really loved her grandfather. I'm going to say that I was a granddad's girl as well. But Candice was a grandpa's girl, and she lost him when she was 6 or 7. So we've got early loss in Candice's life. We've got the loss of her grandfather, who she loved very much when she was little. We've also got her mother leaving the home and not seeing her for quite a few years. So we've got some attachment issues there, I feel. It's good that Candice did have an early attachment with her grandfather. We do know that in cases where children are terribly abused in the home, if they have one family member or family friend that's close to them, that can act as a protective factor in the future trajectory of that person's life. So it's good that she had that early attachment, but we do have that early loss. And obviously, it's nothing that anyone could control. If someone dies, then a child has to learn how to deal with loss. Unfortunately, we all deal with loss. But it's just an interesting observation that she did have quite possibly some attachment issues that have lingered into adulthood because of the early loss and the early problems in her childhood.
I love all my children, each and every one of them.
Oh, I know you do.
Even the ones that, before summer and the boys.
Yeah. I wish you would reach back out to your oldest daughter again. She looks just like you.
She don't want to talk to me.
Well,
people have gotten to her. YouTube people have gotten to her, and it's made her believe that I'm this evil person. Like, in the beginning, I was talking to her, and everything was cool. We were sending long drawn out paragraphs, sentences to each other, and we were finally getting a connection back together. She was actually going to come out and visit with me. And then when Summer came up missing, YouTube people got a hold of her and whispered in her ear and destroyed what we had going.
I do know that there were some screenshots floating around. I can't put my hands on them right this moment, but I do know I've got some somewhere, of a conversation between Candice and her oldest daughter, who's also called Candice. So Candice the Third. There's an ancestor of Candice's who's also called Candice. So Candice the Third is actually Candice the Fourth. And it's an unusual spelling, isn't it? So I've never seen Candice spelled like that before, but anyway. Yeah, she had a daughter and a son from her first relationship. They got taken off her. So it is true that she's lost all the children that she ever had. But there has been some perhaps misconceptions about the violence that Candice allegedly made towards those 2 children. I don't know how much of that is true, and she doesn't talk about that in this video, but she does talk about them, so let's carry on.
Well, just keep praying. Maybe God will restore that again.
And it's okay, and I can't be mad at her because she's got to take care of her kids, and she don't want her kids going through the dramatic.
That's interesting that Candice the Third or the Fourth has kids. I didn't know that. So Candice is a grandma. She's a grandma by marriage because Don has grandkids, but I didn't know that she was also a biological grandma as well. So interesting.
And drama, and I don't blame her.
No, I don't blame her.
And I'm not mad at her, and I'll still love her from afar, like I always have.
Yeah.
I don't know where they got that I pulled a gun out on CPS.
Oh, you didn't? Because that's what I heard.
Oh my gosh. No, I did not pull the gun out on CPS. The gun laid up against the wall next to the door. And when CPS walked into the door, the gun laid there.
Oh, so where did I get that from? Because I heard it on the YouTube streets.
Well, there you go. You heard it on the YouTube streets.
Yeah, the YouTube streets quite often make mountains out of molehills. This is a record from the Wisconsin Circuit Court system. Again, this is public record. In 2003, she was accused of pointing a gun at a CPS worker, but that case was dismissed. So intentionally pointing firearm at a person, so there's 2 of those, and then resisting or obstructing an officer. All of those charges were dismissed, but she did plead guilty to a Class B misdemeanor of disorderly conduct, and that was against a CPS worker who came to their home. But yeah, that charge about intentionally pointing a firearm at a person was dismissed. So we have no evidence that she actually did that. It was an accusation, but maybe it was one word against another that was dropped. So there's that.
This is funny as crap. Like one time when I was a kid, because my dad didn't want me around or whatever, so I was in different group homes and foster homes and stuff. Because I acted out when I was a kid because I didn't think my family loved me.
So she's admitted there that she acted out when she was a kid because she didn't think her family loved her. Again, it's Candus's perception. Maybe they did love her, but because there was problems with maybe Candus's personality, maybe she just had a temperament that clashed with her dad because her mother wasn't there, and maybe he did feel closer to the younger girls. But she said there that she acted out, she did get into trouble, and she got with her first 2 children's father when she was very young. She was only 19 and he was in his 40s. I don't know what it is about the 2 Canduses preferring much older men. Maybe it's some kind of father figure. I don't know. But it's another interesting observation that she was very young when she had those first 2 children. It doesn't justify anything that might have happened. As I said, I'm trying to be neutral in this video. But if she was delinquent, if she didn't feel that she had much parental support, and then she had these 2 kids, and by all account, the father of these children, who was much older than her, was also violent. And we can see in court records that there was domestic abuse on both sides, both charged with domestic abuse. There's no records from Wisconsin about her abusing her children, though. So that's another thing that has come out on the YouTube streets that we've actually got no evidence for. But the 2 children were taken away and were adopted into other families. So she did lose her first 2 kids. And you're going to say, yeah, there's got to be a reason for that. And there absolutely does. I didn't know, though, that Candus had been put into foster care as a young person. I didn't know that. Maybe her dad couldn't cope with her. Again, personality clash. Again, delinquency that Candus had that her sisters didn't. I don't know. Speculation. But it does seem that that's the case.
And so as a child, you act out because you're like, well, you know, if your family don't love you and care about you, then screw it. Why not be a fuck up, you know?
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I grew up in foster cares and the system and stuff like that, and it's been a crazy life that I've had to live, and people just don't realize what people go through.
When you go through that, you don't, and you're young, you don't realize. You're just, a child's mind does not develop fully until they're in their early 20s, like 21, 22.
That's true. Candus, early health problems, disrupted childhood, sense of loss and abandonment. And we do know from psychological studies that early disruption in life can lead to problems with crime and delinquency in later life. So this is a study on parenting styles and raising delinquent children, responsibility of parents and encouraging violent behaviour from 2016. So it says here, it's increasingly more common for parents of violent youth to blame police for having to respond to violent behaviour of youth with force, at times lethal force. However, parents should assume responsibility for providing their children with appropriate parenting styles. Now again, we've only got Candus's perception of what her parents were like. Candus Senior is here to give her side of the story if she wants to, but Jim Bly is not here. So what do we know about parenting styles? So 2 factors have been identified as being important for a child to develop morally: parental warmth and demandingness. Parental warmth is described as the degree of support offered to a child by a parent. Demandingness is described as the degree of control the parent exerts over their child, so setting standards and so on. Sympathy, which appears part of parental warmth and demandingness, appears to have an indirect positive impact on instilling pro-social or moral development on adolescents. Child rearing involving harsh punishment, power assertive parenting, lax parenting, rejecting or neglectful parenting methods, and child abuse are related to antisocial, aggressive and violent behaviour in adolescence. And we can talk about social learning theory and all of that. So I'll leave a link to this in the description box. There's a happy middle in parenting, that if you're too authoritarian, you're too strict, that can lead to problems. And then if you're too lax, or certainly if you're neglectful or abusive, that can lead to problems. But there's this kind of happy medium where you've got to be authoritative but warm. And we can't always blame the parents. Let's be very clear. We can't always blame the parents. You know, kids who've had really good childhoods sometimes go on to commit crimes. Sometimes they go on to abuse drugs, become delinquent, etc., etc. So this is not to blame every single parent who has a troubled child, because some of that is genetics. Some of that is the child's own personality. Things like conduct disorders can influence a child more than their parents. So we've got to make that point too. But this is interesting. This is an interesting read from Psychology Today. Why do abused children often grow up to be abusive parents? We don't know that Candus was abused as a child. We've heard reports, but we don't know how abusive Candus was to her own children. But there have been problems. We can say that for sure. This Psychology Today article is talking about a study that was published who found that 30% of children whose mothers had experienced maltreatment as kids had also experienced maternal abuse or neglected by the age of 12. Again, we don't know that Candus was abused, but we do know there was some early loss in her life which could have led to attachment problems. And this article says, the results are especially concerning given the generally poor outcomes for victims of child abuse or neglect across multiple health and social domains. Abused children often grow into adults with poor impulse control, a heightened sense of shame, over-alertness to threat, easily triggered, with extreme levels of distress that can result in early substance use and mental illness compounding harms. When these children become parents, their capacity for compassion or trust can be impaired. They often cannot see the needs of their own children and can find it especially difficult to provide the nurturing parenting that they would so want to offer. Our results are consistent with well-described biological mechanisms for intergenerational transmission of child maltreatment through the lasting impacts of assault or neglect, altered brain development, and disturbed relational patterning, strongly suggesting the observed observations are causal and at least partly preventable. So it's the nature versus nurture debate here, really. But there are early temperament factors, personality factors from the nature side, and then you've got the nurture side. So again, we know that there's potentially attachment problems in Candus's early life. We know that from her own perception, she didn't feel loved. Whether or not that's true, it's the perception that's important. And it's an increased risk for not being able to parent your own children very well, for being impulsive, perhaps an increased risk for substance abuse, and we know that's the case for Candus. We've heard from a family friend that Candus had some learning difficulties as a child. We know that she appears to be very childlike in some ways. So all of those factors potentially can lead to problems being a parent. Doesn't mean to say that she doesn't love her kids deep down, but it's a problem with the parenting style. Okay, so we'll play a little bit more of this video and then we'll call it a day.
An adult until you get into your 20s. And so it's easy to make mistakes, especially if you've had a rough life, you know?
I mean, I think I grew up, like, when I grew up too fast when I was little.
Yeah.
Like, I had to do stuff and, like, had to protect myself from, well, not try to be rude, but inhumane people.
Really? Like, what do you mean, like, inhumane? Like,
well, I remember one time it was somewhere in Wisconsin. I think it was at Eau Claire or something. They put me in this group home. And I was only probably about 12 years old, I think.
uh-huh.
And I remember sitting up on the top bunk. And the song come on, and I can't remember the name of the song. Oh my gosh, what's the name of the song? If Only God Knows Why. I think it played.
Mhm.
But I sat up there, and they did not ask me if I needed anything to eat, anything to drink, if I needed any sheets or anything like that.
Wow.
It was a very evil place, and like, I'm like, all these other kids were like way older than me, and because I was so young, they would push me around.
Oh, so how did you get food and stuff?
Well, eventually, I told my caseworker when I was little, eventually they moved me to a real foster home that actually cared about kids.
Oh.
So that is interesting if it's true. So it adds to the sense of abandonment. It indicates abuse and neglect. We know that there's problems in a lot of group homes. We can't verify that it's true, but it is an interesting observation, and we've got no reason to believe it isn't true, that if she was placed in a group home with much older kids, then that's going to be a risk factor for, well, not a good outcome. So it's good that she was moved from that home to a better place.
And that's where I stayed until I actually got used to like carrying and trying to build my life. Like, I graduated
Wow.
from Elk Mound High School in Wisconsin.
Wow.
But there's a lot of people that said I've never graduated, but I have.
Well, I'm proud of you, Candus.
And I had a class ring when I was with my first kid's dad, and he got mad at me and took it and threw it out in the yard, and I could never find it ever again.
Oh.
And he was a very evil man.
That is so cruel, ain't it?
My first kid's dad would tell me to run, and I was 18 when I met him, so I really didn't understand how love and relationships worked, right?
Yeah.
So he was much older. He was in his 40s. So there's massive potential for abuse there. She's looking for a connection, a father figure, and this guy was abusive. We can see this from court records that there was some abuse in that relationship. So it's really sad, but it's not unexpected in a child that has early loss, attachment problems, abuse, that they try to find a connection with someone and they don't understand how relationships work. They don't know how to get out of that situation. And then she had 2 kids very young. Not defending her. I'm staying neutral here, but it's a troubled life. It is.
So I moved out there with him, and he lived on his dad's property. And he would literally tell me to run through the swamp, and he would shoot above my head with a shotgun.
Oh my God.
Oh wow.
Was you terrified?
Yeah, I was very terrified, but I had 2 kids with him, and he would like psychologically abuse me. Like, he would always be like, "Well, if you leave me, I'm taking the kids, and there ain't nothing you can do." And I love my kids, you know. I didn't want to be away from my kids.
Right.
And then she did end up losing those kids, but what a situation to be in, and not psychologically capable to deal with it, get out of it, and feeling trapped. It's very sad.
And so, like, I tried everything, like, to make him happy. He would, like, come home from work, and we lived in this little itty-bitty camper, like, a little itty-bitty camper.
Mhm.
And he would come home from work, and if supper wasn't done, and he didn't like the way I peppered it or salted it or whatever it tastes, he would slam it against the wall and, like, he would say, "You dumb," saying all kinds of hateful crap.
Oh.
It was just, I've had a very troubling childhood and kind of a traumatic teenage life that I usually don't tell people about.
It's very sad. It's very sad. And we've no reason not to believe that these things happened. So it can have long-lasting effects for the rest of that person's life. There's things that can mitigate those issues. I guess at this stage, you know, Candus is 40 now. She's in a relationship with Don. There's substance abuse problems. Maybe Don treats her better than that first guy did, but there's still problems. And we know from psychological research that being in one domestic violent relationship can lead to a predisposition to end up in other violent relationships. It takes a lot of rebuilding of someone's life, and you've really got to want to do it. And I don't know that Candus has that psychological strength to be able to do it. I hope she does. It's good that she's talking about this stuff. She's got to want to improve her life. Is she psychologically capable of doing that? I don't know. It was a very interesting conversation, so I'm glad she spoke about it. But I am going to leave it there before this video gets massively long. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Please do be respectful, and I'll see you very soon. Bye, guys.